On an ordinary Tuesday in Chicago, when the lake wore a grey-blue coat, and the wind pressed its palm against the glass as if testing the building's manners, Michael Rowan left the newsroom early and walked 3 extra blocks to avoid the corner where a memory waited. He was 36 and the kind of man who believed in small edits and second drafts. He worked as a copy chief at a local paper and fixed sentences the way a careful neighbor fixes a fence. Quiet, steady, grateful to be useful. His life had become a string of dependable days. Coffee, headlines, commas, a call to his sister Ellie in Vancouver. A walk by the water, a stubborn attempt at sleep. He did not expect the day to change its tone in the middle. He did not expect a voice to rearrange his breathing. She stood outside the ceramic studio next to the Ethiopian cafe. A woman with clay on her forearm like a brave smudge and a gaze that met the world straight on. Her name was Claire Bennett. She had moved from Halifax 6 months earlier to help her aunt recover from a knee surgery and to chase a belief that clay could hold what words sometimes could not. She wore a denim apron and a sweater the color of quiet pine. Her hair was tucked behind one ear. A stubborn curl refused. Michael paused because the display in the window looked like a map of feelings. Bowls that seemed to remember hands. Mugs with rims like lullabies. A small vase shaped like a breath. Claire turned at the sound of the bell, saw him, and lifted her chin with the friendly courage Midwestern streets can teach. She said the sentence that would seem innocent to anyone passing by. She said, "Are you here for the class or the kill pickup?" Michael opened his mouth to say neither, closed it, opened it again, said, "I am here for the class if you have room for a person who is tired of screens." Claire smiled in a way that made the cold outside step back. She said, "We just had a cancellation. There is a wheel open. Come in, wash your hands, leave your day at the sink." He did as told. He rolled up his sleeves and watched grey water turn into honesty. He followed her to the station beside the big windows where late afternoon laid down its longer shadows. The studio smelled like earth after rain and hope after disappointment. A radio near the glazed shelf murmured a folk song that forgot the chorus and found it again. Claire showed him how to center a lump of clay. She pressed his hands with a soft authority, not guiding so much as inviting. She said, "The wheel is a truth teller. If your mind is racing, it will wobble. If you breathe like a person, and not like a task, it will come back to you." Michael laughed once, because she had rearranged his day with the gentlest verbs. He touched the clay and felt it push back. A conversation more honest than most meetings. Other students worked around them. A nurse who came to unwind after nights. A retired math teacher who threw bowls like theorems. A teenager who built small monsters that clutched tiny coffee cups. The shape of a city learning tenderness. Claire moved through the room with the teachers listening. She corrected postures like a violin gets tuned. Low at first, then true. She returned to Michael and watched him fight the wobble. She said, "Try less force and more presence." He said, "That sounds like an editorial note to my life." She grinned and said, "Clay is ruthless and fair. It accepts what you bring. It remembers what you let go." He found the center once and lost it twice. He cursed under his breath in a way that would not embarrass the radio. Claire nodded as if failure were a language. She said again, "He did." She said, "Now lift your fingers so gently the clay believes you." He did. The cylinder rose, a miracle hiding as physics. He laughed like someone who had been given back a childhood hour. At closing, she cleaned the wheels with quick compassion. He helped stack bats and rinse sponges. She asked what he did for work. He told her about commas and headlines and the way a good sentence can hold a city's trembling for a day, she told him about Halifax fog and Chicago wind and the way both teach you to dress in layers. She told him about her Aunt Nora who measured recovery in jokes. While he reached for his coat, Claire wiped a smear of clay from her wrist and said another innocent sentence. She said, "Some of us go for tea after class. Would you like to come? He said yes with the speed of a person who remembered how to say yes before doubt reads the invitation. They walked next door to the cafe where steam curled like cursive. The owner, Salam, greeted Claire like family and gave Michael the kind of welcome that makes a stranger sit straighter. They shared injera and lentils and a pot of strong tea. They talked about work and seasons, about a city that knows how to mourn and celebrate within the same week, about names, about the best place to buy bread that tastes like ritual. They did not trade tragedies like baseball cards. They traded small truths like recipes. At one point, Claire tucked hair behind her ear and said quietly, "I like how you listen. I can feel my shoulders dropping." He said, "I like how you give directions without bossing the day." They laughed, and silence arrived. The good kind, not awkward, not empty. A silence that said we are both here, and need not perform. It lasted a minute, maybe two. Long enough for the tea to cool and the air to choose sides. Long enough for Michael's heart to remember that it can be loud and not be wrong. Then the silence tilted. It became the other kind. The kind that carries unasked questions and unmade promises. It pressed its hand on the table and waited. Claire looked at him. Michael looked at her. Neither spoke. The room kept moving around them. The radio changed songs. Salam refilled cups. A couple near the window argued gently about vacation plans. And in the middle of all of that, Claire said another innocent line that became a door. She said, "Be glaze on Thursdays if you want to see what colors do to shape." Michael said, "I want to." And behind the sentence stood all the other verbs he did not yet have the brave for. He paid. She thanked him. They stood in the doorway with scarves and the city and a weather forecast that could not keep up with their faces. He said, "Good night, Claire." She said, "Good night, Michael." The wind tested their names and found them worthy. All week the newsroom clattered, and the city breathed through sirens and laughter, and snow that tried on the idea and then backed off. Michael felt his chest carry a new door where old walls had been. He texted Ellie in Vancouver a photo of a crypt cylinder, and she texted back a string of exclamation marks and a demand for a set of mugs by the time she next visited. He laughed. At his desk quietly, and his coworker Jonah asked if the headline wrote itself for once. Michael said something like that. Thursday came on purpose. He grabbed his scarf and the little coin Ellie had sent from Granville Island for luck. He arrived early and watched Claire put out glaze buckets like someone setting out a conversation. She explained thickness and gravity and humility. She warned him that glaze changes in the kiln, like people change under pressure. Sometimes better, sometimes stranger, often truer. He listened like a man who finally found a classroom worth the tuition of his attention. They worked side by side, brushing and dipping, resisting the urge to fix what needed time. They talked about movies with endings that respect an adult heart, about hockey loyalties, Halifax versus Chicago with Vancouver by marriage, about the sensation of being new in a city that seems to have no spare chairs, and then discovering where the chairs live. Near closing, Claire held up a small bowl he had glazed and said, "This wants to be part of a set." And Michael said, "I would like to learn to make a set." His voice doing the small bravery he was practicing. She said, "Come Saturday morning. I teach a small group that is more about practice than product." He said, "I will be here." Saturday morning arrived with a sky the color of an inside joke. The studio warmed slowly. People took their stations like a choir searching for key. Claire moved through the room with attention measured in inches and minutes. Michael tried a new form and failed and tried again, and found something that held water. He felt something in himself hold water too. At break, Claire offered him half of a cinnamon roll and asked what brought him to Chicago. He said a job, a person, a wish for a bigger story. The person left. The job stayed. The wish learned new letters. He asked her the same. She said an aunt with a brave new knee and a desire to see if Clay could keep up with her feelings, he said, does it? She said most days. The others we just keep going. He said, I like that plan. After class, he reached for his coat, and Claire reached for hers, and their hands brushed like two commas, choosing a semicolon. Neither apologized. The day did not require it. They walked to the lake, because the water had an opinion and they wanted to hear it. They watched gulls negotiate with wind and a kid in a red coat negotiate with ice. They talked about their favorite teachers and how names stay in the body longer than anyone predicts. They did not talk about the silence that had visited the cafe. They let it trail them like a polite dog, present, not pushy, loyal to truth. In the weeks that followed, they built a pattern that looked like a life trying to right itself. Class. Tea. A grocery run that turned into a debate on soup. A neighbor's gallery opening where Claire's mug sat on a table like a soft sermon, and Michael hovered nearby like a deacon of encouragement. A city council meeting where Michael spoke about the paper's role in telling the truth without fireworks. Claire squeezed his hand and later said, I am proud of your careful courage. He said, I am proud of your loud kindness. They laughed at the idea of pride behaving. And then came the night when the silence changed everything. It was snowing for real. Not the flirty kind, the committed kind. The studio windows filmed white. The radio played a holiday song that respected grief. Claire was closing alone. Michael had stayed to help because a glaze bucket had misbehaved, and because company is sometimes the most useful tool. They stacked kilns and wiped counters. They turned off the big lights and left one string of small bulbs lit like a lane home. Claire leaned against the wedging table and exhaled as if the day had weighed boyish and left a bruise. She said an innocent thing that anyone could say. She said, I am tired, and the room held it. Michael said, can I carry anything that is not heavy? She said, the funny thing is the heavy part is invisible. He said, I can still stand near it. She said, please do. They stood, not touching, not performing. The bulbs making halos on faces, the snow outside insisting on its opinion. Claire said my aunt had a fall last night, and I spent the morning talking her out of refusing help. She wants to be the kind of strong that does not need other people. I want to be the kind that knows when to say yes. And I think I have been pretending. Michael said pretending to be strong. Claire said pretending that being needed is the same as being loved. And then she said the sentence that would seem harmless on paper and be a bell in the room. She said, will you come with me tomorrow to help me choose a chair for her? One with arms and a seat that honors knees. Michael said yes, because the question had been earned, and the answer wanted to be true. And then silence entered behind the words. Not the comforting one, the charged one. It filled the distance between them. It asked, who are we, and what are we building, and are you ready to say it out loud? He felt the weight and the invitation and the risk. He felt the old memory on the corner of his street shaking its head like a traffic light that will not change. Claire felt the way her chest opens when a door she did not know she had kept locked moves. They did not touch. The room would have noticed. They did not joke. That would have been easy. They stood and let the silence ask. It felt like a new room had been built around them. A room with generous windows and no furniture yet. A room that might become a kitchen or a studio or a porch if they kept choosing. Claire finally said softly, I do not want to pretend with you. I am attracted to you, and I am also not ready to skip over the part where we become capable of holding each other's ordinary. Can we do this like a long furrow on the wheel? Centered and messy and patient, can we be careful and brave? Michael swallowed and found the courage to move a half step closer. He said, I want that. I want something that does not punish silence. I want to be proud of how we talk and how we rest. I want to be the kind of man who is more helpful than impressive. She laughed once, a sound that forgave an entire week. She said, tomorrow then, chairs and soup and a walk if the city allows. He said tomorrow, and the bulbs hummed approval. The next day they hunted for a chair but knew humility. They tested arms and heights and levers. They measured Nora's doorway twice. They ate soup with bread that respected butter. They delivered the chair and taught it the family. Nora declared it a throne for reasonable people, and told Michael that if he broke Claire's heart, she would chase him with a cane and better cardiovascular fitness than he expected. He promised respect with a straight face and the smallest bow. Claire wiped tears that were not sad, and everyone pretended not to notice. The winter deepened and their life practiced. They went to the paper's holiday party and left early, because music is better when you can hear each other. They built an almost set of bowls. Number 3 refused to behave, and they loved it anyway. They started a list on the chalkboard in Claire's kitchen titled Small Mercies and added entries like extra ginger, bus driver who waved, elevator that waited, headline that mattered, aunt laughed, found glove on the fence post, tried again. They met each other's people. Ellie visited from Vancouver with a coat that claimed impossibly warm and demanded the mugs Michael had promised. She fell in love with Salam's Shiro instantly and told Claire, "You have given my brother back his vowels." Claire said he gave himself back his own vowels. "I just set out a chair where he could hear them." Ellie cried at the airport anyway. Michael introduced Claire to Jonah and to the newsroom. Resident cynic who secretly writes poems and hides them under the coffee filters. Claire left a note under the filters that said, "Your poems saved the morning. I owe you 3 pounds of beans." Signed, a grateful stranger. The cynic ran a lap around the block and blamed the wind for his red eyes. In January, they took a train to Halifax to meet the part of Claire that lives where fog negotiates with church bells. They met her mother, who believed tea cures most things and stew the rest. They walked the boardwalk in boots that argued with ice. They visited the pottery co-op where Claire learned to centre on days when grief refused to be invited. Michael learned the name of the wave that throws itself at the rocks anyway. He called it devotion. Claire called it Tuesday. They agreed. The months moved like a careful seam. March practiced thaw. April apologized with rain. May remembered how light works. They kept showing up for class and for soup and for chairs and for the kind of arguments that find the truth without drawing blood. They wrote down their boundary rules on sticky notes. No sarcasm after 10. Feed each other before feedback. Ask for time. Give it. Kiss on the cheek when angry to remind the fight that it is not in charge. The notes fell off the fridge, but the rules stayed. In June, the studio hosted a small show. Claire's mugs were on a long table like a paragraph about home. Michael arrived with flowers and a nervous grin. People touched handles like handshakes. A woman asked Claire if the clay told her what to make, or if she told it. Claire said both and neither. "I listen, I ask, I fail, I adjust." The woman nodded like she had been waiting to hear that answer in a different room. She bought a set and asked for a story to go with it. Claire told one about a night when snow and silence taught honesty. Michael stood close enough to count breaths and far enough to let her own volume find its correct room. A week later, the paper published a feature on a neighborhood garden that grew tomatoes and peace between neighbors. Michael edited the piece with the care of a person trimming a wick. The comments section tried to ruin it. He resisted the urge to argue with strangers. He walked to the studio instead and found Claire cleaning glaze from a brush like she was restoring someone's faith. He sat on the stool and said, "Sometimes I am exhausted by the way noise is rewarded." She said, "Sometimes I am exhausted by dishes." Both are real. Take a nap on the sofa, he did. And woke to a note on his chest that said, "You can be tired here. Your good is not measured hourly." He kept the note in his wallet. Summer stretched. The lake turned blue in a way that made lunch breaks holy. They walked past a softball game that looked like kindness pretending to be competition. They watched a neighbor kid learn to ride a bike and applauded without irony. They hosted a porch night where friends brought poems and bread. They installed the chair in a better place because Nora had learned its temperament, and they had learned hers. They learned Nora's laugh before she told the joke. In August, Claire's mother visited and brought a suitcase of weather and jam. She watched them move around each other in the kitchen and said, "You two make good soup." Later she took Claire's hand and said, "Your father would have liked him." Claire nodded and did not hide the wet at the edge of her eyes. Michael gave them privacy to tell the details that belonged to a family. He took out the trash and came back with the quiet that says, "I am still here." In the fall, Michael faced a layoff round at the paper. His hands shook as he cut words he believed in to fit pages that shrank. He told Claire he felt like a doctor measuring out less oxygen. She said, "I cannot stop the business model from failing. I can feed you. I can write letters with you. I can remind you of the sentence you said in January about being more helpful than impressive." He printed that sentence and taped it to his monitor. It held. October taught the city to look beautiful while letting go. The studio fired a big kill and everyone waited at the same time. Opening day felt like birthday morning. Michael's bowl came out with a hairline crack and a grace that made him love it more. Claire said, "This can be for lemons. Imperfection can have a job." Michael said, "That is the best sermon you have ever preached." She said, "Wait until you hear the one about mugs that prefer to be planters." They laughed until the kill coughed a small puff of dust and air. November brought a scare. Nora fell again, not badly, but enough to shake their breathing. Claire called Michael at work and said another innocent sentence that carried bells and sirens. She said, "Can you come?" And he went. He left mid-sentence because some sentences can wait. He arrived to see paramedics already leaving with smiles. Nora scolded the rug and forgave it. They ordered tacos that night and ate on the floor and watched a movie that knew how to soothe without lying. Michael fell asleep with his head on Claire's shoulder, and she did not move until the credits finished their responsible listing. December wrapped the city in lights and obligations. They chose fewer obligations and more lights. They put a ribbon on the chair. They bought gifts like mittens and second chances. They wrote cards to people they missed and to people they did not but needed to honor. They took a train to Halifax again because Claire's mother said family first, and because Michael had never seen the harbor freeze. They stood on the boardwalk with noses like small protests and promised to keep promising. The new year arrived like a careful friend. They put a fresh list on the chalkboard. More naps, better bread, patience with headlines. More bowls, less pretending. Invite Jonah to read his poems out loud. Teach Nora how to silence her phone at the play. Claire added one more. Learn to love the silence between invitations. Michael added, learn to speak before fear edits the sentence. They clinked mugs gently and let January be January. In February, Michael was offered a job at a non-profit newsroom working on long-form stories about housing and hope. The pay was a little less and the purpose a lot more. He took it. He came to the studio that night with a face like rainfall finding its river. Claire said, "I am proud of the person your sentences are becoming." He said, "I am proud of the person your clay is holding." They stood with that for a while, because you cannot rush the way gratitude sits down in the body. In March, the studio lost its lease. The building sold itself to a future that did not include clay. Claire announced it at the end of class with a voice that refused to panic. She said, "We will find another room. Wheels can roll. Patience travels. We will mourn and pack. And then we will call it an opening instead of a closing." Michael watched her hold the room the way she holds clay, with firmness and mercy. He offered the newsroom conference room on Saturdays for glazing parties until a new space appeared. The editor said yes because sometimes editors know where community lives. April delivered an address on an alley where light was better, and rent was just barely possible. The community painted walls and dragged wheels and carried hope in that ridiculous way people do when they have decided to be a we. The first class smelled like fresh drywall and courage. Claire cried for 3 seconds and then taught posture and patience like a person born for it. Michael labeled shelves and kissed a smudge of white paint off her cheek when nobody looked, and when somebody did they looked away in the generous method of city people who root for outcomes. Spring became a kind of rehearsal for a bigger sentence. Michael began to save for a ring, not because rings are magic, but because rituals can hold a promise steady on a windy day. Claire began to notice neighborhoods where a tiny backyard might someday hold a kill that used to be a wish. Nora learned the bus route to the new studio and brought scones once a week like a grandmother to many. Salam sent thermoses on cold days. Jonah read a poem at open studio night and made 3 cynics cry and blame dust. Everything kept staying. On a July evening when the lake finally relaxed and the moon practiced being decorative, Michael took Claire to the Ethiopian cafe after class. Salam had closed early and left a key like trust. Candles blinked in jars. The radio murmured a song that knew about bridges. Michael set a small bowl on the table. The first one he had ever made that felt almost professional. Inside sat a ring that did not brag. He said an innocent sentence on purpose. He said, "Would you help me keep making a life that holds water?" And then he let the silence arrive, the charged one. The kind that had asked them questions and carried their answers for a year. He did not rush it. He did not rescue it. He let it be the room and the window and the wind. Claire reached into the bowl and lifted the ring and the bowl and his hands all at once. She said yes with a voice that sounded like scented clay, and a hometown warmed. The city outside kept moving. Buses sighed. Bikes argued with potholes. Somewhere a siren told truth. Inside they cried a little and laughed a lot and ate bread with their fingers and let the candles have their moment. Salam texted a string of emojis that meant "I am a witness." Nora called to say she knew before they told her. Ellie sent fireworks from a Vancouver balcony view. Jonah wrote a headline purely for them and buried it in the next day's crossword, where only certain people would see it. The clue read devotion's tool, the answer was patience. They planned gentle. They planned local. They planned a backyard with string lights and a borrowed arch. They asked people to bring a sentence instead of a gift. The sentences were better than any blender. The next month they stood under a sky that had practiced for this and said the vows they had written on the backs of old glaze recipe cards. They promised to keep silence honest and words careful, to center and recenter, to feed each other before feedback, to let bowls become planters when needed, to keep a chair in the room for grief and another for joy, to craft a life more helpful than impressive, to remember Nora's jokes and Salam's shiro and Ellie's insistence that mugs are deadlines with handles. The neighborhood clapped and the wind approved, and the gulls made a noise like confetti if you were generous. They kissed like people who planned to keep doing dishes together. They danced like co-workers off shift. They sat later with their feet bare on the steps and read the sentences people had brought. A teenager wrote, "Your quiet is not empty." An older neighbor wrote, "Love is the policy, not the emergency." Nora wrote, "Chairs matter more than thrones." Jonah wrote, "The only correction is kindness." Salam wrote, "Eat, then eat again." And Ellie wrote, "Call your sister." They started married life the way they had started everything, on a Tuesday, with a pot of tea and a wheel and a headline and a walk by the lake, where the wind tried to posture and they smiled at it like old friends. They made more bowls and offered more soup. They lost one argument and won another. They took a train to Halifax and a bus to Vancouver, and drove once to Duluth just because the word felt good in the mouth. They built a small kill with the neighborhood because permits are love letters underlined. They hosted Sunday quiet where people could show up and read or nap or sit with grief in a safe chair. They kept learning to love the silence that follows innocent words. They taught the silence to be a room and not a test. They kept holding each other's ordinary as if it were rare. They grew a habit of looking up at the same time, when the first star arrived, because it felt like calling roll. They hung the ring bowl near the door, as a reminder that questions can be invitations and answers can be rooms you build. And when years later they told the story to a nephew who wanted to know how love begins, they said sometimes it begins with a question about a class or a kill pickup, and then a silence that is not empty, and then two people who do not pretend. It begins with small sentences that learn how to hold big promises. It begins with chairs that know their job, and bowls that hold lemons and hands that keep showing up. It begins with the decision to be more helpful than impressive. And it keeps going every Tuesday, every glazed night, every quiet morning when the city forgets to be loud, and you remember to be brave. The path lights in Nora's hallway held them together. That planning is a letter the future can read. The chair that honored knees showed them plainly that being seen helps the day stand taller. The postcard from Vancouver fog outlived their worry, that mornings are promises kept at night. The path lights in Nora's hallway blessed their routine, that silence is trustworthy when it listens first. The fence Jonah helped mend welcomed their return, that patience keeps a music of its own. The ferry horn they heard on vacation outlived their worry, that laughter braces the day like a hidden beam. The plant that survived their learning curve kept telling them that tenderness survives on practice and practical chores. The apron pocket full of pencils made clear to them that ordinary work is devotion breathing steadily. The sticky notes with boundary rules gently insisted that neighborhoods become family by choice and invitation. The mop bucket that knew the truth of closing time outlived their worry, that planning is a letter the future can read. The scarf Claire knit on the train to Halifax brightened their courage that tenderness survives on practice and practical chores.